this probably only went out to half or maybe fewer than a half of you who are on the Center for Mindful Living, maybe it's more. Listserv, I mentioned just yesterday that the format today would be different than usual, that rather than a meditation and a talk and then movement and then groups and then a meditation to finish and announcements, that I thought today would focus mainly on two things. One, a longer period of meditation or periods of meditation, and the opportunity to raise questions, share questions, and that can be done, we'll take some time to do it like in the full group, but also to raise questions in the chat if you'd like to. And I want to just say about that questioning is a really important part, I believe is a really important part of our practice. I shared last week in the talk that I gave about practicing for about 10 years with a teacher, Christopher Titmuss, and going to a lot of retreats with him in the US and Europe and also in India. And at one retreat of just a question coming up as like a burning question, and just really how important it was for me at that time to have things kind of congeal into a question. There's within the kind of the Buddhist teachings, it's understood that doubt is an afflictive state, an unhelpful thing where, oh, I can't do this. Oh, I don't know if these teachings are any good. When it's a kind of proliferation. But when it's questioning, it's incredibly powerful and essential really to our practice to ask ourselves, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? What is suffering? What is craving? What is letting go? All of these questions, many, many more questions as well. What exactly is compassion? What is loving kindness? However those questions kind of form for us. My one happened at that time to be about suffering, and I asked if the search for the end of suffering, it was itself suffering. And I don't know why it came up in that form at that time, but I remember how powerful and kind of, it wasn't afflictive in a painful way, but it was like in a really, really deep wanting to know, and I got an answer. And in the end, as I look back on it, and I shared this last week, in some way, the question and the questioning may be more important than the answer that's given. Does that resonate? Just that sense of having that question, because having the question, you're already really asking yourself it. And yes, somebody, some teacher or the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh or whoever it might be be able to, or Tara Brach or, whoever, maybe me at times, may be able to kind of give that, something that can be really helpful. But the essence really is, I think, is the asking of the question, and we'll find our way to the answer. Anyway, just to say that as an encouragement really to question, to ask questions. And if there are any right now or today or this week or next week, to really share them in the, in the chat and in the full group as well. So I'll leave that as an opening, invitation and reflection. And what I'd like to do with the meditation, as I said, is do a longer meditation. And this meditation will end in a reflection. And I kind of wanted to share a little bit about the times that we're living in really in a way of reflection, connected with something that I've spoken about a number of times in the last year or year and a half, 2 years, this idea, this conception of unmourned grief. It's something that for me has been a really powerful kind of reflection and understanding. And I want to, in a way, continue some of that reflection today at the end of the meditation. I was going to do it at the beginning, but just this morning it came to me that when we're in that meditative space and we're really, being present, then we're actually listening in a different way, typically, I mean, not that we can't listen in a very, in an open way, but it's so easy for us to be in our heads, in the way we're going through much of our life, a lot of it we're on autopilot and we're, things are kind of flitting around in our heads. But if we can allow ourselves to settle, then we can, we can actually hear things in a different way. They can land in a different way. Perhaps they can go deeper, again in a different way. So I just share that as a reflection, and just so that you'll know that, in the last maybe 5 minutes or so of the meditation, I just share some reflections. And with that, I would invite us all to find a comfortable, relaxed posture. So whatever will work for you to allow you to be comfortable. And if you feel like lying down and turning your screen off for the meditation, obviously feel free to do that. Whatever will help you be as present as you can be and as settled, relaxed, present as you can be for this period. Maybe we'll do 25 minutes, maybe 30. We'll just see how things unfold. So take some moments to find a posture that's comfortable, that's relaxed, that's grounded, where you're really consciously taking your seat. If you think about an archetype of the Buddha under the tree, under the Bodhi tree, sitting, or someone else, sitting with that dignity, receptivity, openness. Maybe just taking in that kind of an image, and bringing it down into your body and into your posture. And inviting the shoulders to relax, and the belly and the chest, letting the belly be open so you can breathe easily. Letting the hands rest wherever they're comfortable, on the knees or in the lap or the thighs. Do a brief scan of your body to see if there's any area where you could relax a little bit more. You might be holding tension in the shoulders or the belly or the face or the hands. Sometimes we grip with our hands without really even being aware of it. So just do that short, brief scanning of the body. See if you can relax as fully as you can. And now touch into your breathing, connect with your breath. Feel the breath as you breathe in and breathe out. Notice as you begin, it might be a little bit tight. And it can be helpful to consciously take a few longer, deeper breaths, if it's helpful. All of this really is if it's helpful. So inviting the breath, come into the lungs, fill the chest, and releasing, relaxing, letting go on the out-breath. Just feeling the cycle of the breath, in-breath and out-breath. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. Relaxing, letting go on the out-breath. Letting yourself settle into being here. Again, if it's helpful, you might invite a smile to your face. You know, it could be just a slight smile, but enough to change the felt sense around the mouth and around the eyes. Feel the sense of relaxing. Letting an image come in, someone or something that makes you feel happy, if that's useful. And just take in that expression, that attitude of a smile. Letting the smile come down into the body, into the area of your heart. Maybe letting it spread through the body. Again, if it's useful to you, you might take a moment or two to reflect on gratitude, on things in your life or people in your life that you feel grateful for, that touch your heart, that open your heart in appreciation, connection, gratitude. If you can, allow yourself to feel any emotions, bodily feelings that come up when you think of, when you bring to mind something or someone you're grateful for. Allow yourself to take it in, to feel it, to feel that gratitude to this person or about this condition or situation or circumstance. You know, for many of us, some feeling of security in this last year can be something to really be grateful for. You know, at a time where so many have suffered such incredible losses and pain that some of us, maybe quite a few of us, have kind of done and been relatively okay. We've been challenged in many, many ways, but we haven't suffered those, those losses, the same kind of losses and pains. Just to be grateful for that, not to be guilty about it, but to appreciate it, to take in this, if you like, this gift. You could say it's a privilege or it's grace. We can appreciate it, we can take it in. And just opening to what's present now in the body, the heart, the mind. We speak a lot about acceptance, about saying yes to our experience, saying yes to what is. And this is really at the very heart of our practice, very heart of this path, and also of other wise paths. If we can say yes to what is, if we can say yes to the present moment, and noticing what that is for you right now, what's calling for your attention. It may be something difficult, something painful, or it may be something joyful. Really something really peaceful or calm or happy, making whatever it is, this willingness to say yes to what is really the doorway to to the deepest peace, to true freedom of the heart. And the truth is, it's often not easy for us to say yes to what is. Times the mind is saying, no, not this. No, this is too much, or this is too far. In order to say yes to what is, you have to really trust in life and trust in yourself. And for many of us, this is difficult because our life experiences have trained us to not trust in ourselves and in life. We've drawn conclusions, maybe at a very early age, that in order to be safe, to be secure, to be happy, we need to defend ourselves, we need to protect ourselves, kind of armor ourselves. And on some level, fear takes over. Fear or anxiety or other things where we're guarding ourselves. So this is really why we, in order to trust ourselves and to trust really in life, we have to train our minds. Perhaps it's better to say we have to retrain our minds. retrain the mind, the heart, even the body, because the body in a way bears the burden of all of this. So it may be just we do it step by step, little by little. Can I open to this, just this moment? Doesn't have to be a big story, but just this moment. Can I say yes to this pain, this discomfort, this difficult emotion, this fear or worry, or this anger that I'm feeling towards somebody? Can I open to the anger without fueling the story? Just notice the story, but choose to stay with the direct experience, what's here right now. It can be helpful to remember that we're only ever being asked, or more accurately, asking ourselves to open to this moment, just this moment, not tomorrow's moment, not even the one in 5 minutes, but just this one, and then this one. And if there's such a thing as moments, in this continuum of time, kind of breaking them into units. But it really is this experience that's here right now. The mind creates the story, you might say the illusion, maybe the story, that this moment is going to last, it's going to be permanent, or last forever, or last for a long time. So the story causes us to suffer because we move away from the direct experience into the story. So the invitation is to just keep coming back to this. In Zen, they have an expression, so that one teacher would always ask, what is this? What is this? Whatever this is, it's this. It's this anger, or it's this feeling right now, this fear. It's often expressed best in the language of poetry or pointing to something. The line of Dorothy Hunt that we come back to. Peace is this moment without judgment. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment without judgment. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. we can see these practices, this training, it's really a training in allowing our heart to open or reopen, allowing ourselves to trust in ourselves, trust in life. I think of it as more a retraining in some ways rather than a training, in that for most of us, with even good enough parenting, we trusted in life. You think of a little toddler, a baby learning to walk, and just the kind of what we might think of as the kind of the courage to take those steps and fall down again and get up again, and just that trust that kind of in life, the life that's moving through that child, easily though it gets shut down. Some things happen and we go into fear and we go into defending mode, and that becomes our habitual pattern over years and decades. So in some ways it's a kind of an unpeeling of this. Retraining ourselves in trust, in that openness of heart. I'm going to share this poem, put it into the meditation by Rumi, with all the ecstatic language of Rumi. It's called A Community of the Spirit. There is a community of the Spirit. Join it and feel the delight of walking in the noisy street and being the noise. Drink all your passion and be a disgrace. Close both eyes to see with the other eye. Open your hands if you want to be held. Sit down in this circle. Quit acting like a wolf and feel the shepherd's love filling you. At night, your beloved wanders. Don't accept consolations. Close your mouth against food. Taste the lover's mouth in yours. You moan, she left me, he left me. 20 more will come. Be empty of worrying. Think of who created thought. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Move outside the tangle of fear thinking. Live in silence. Flow down and down in always widening rings of being. Flow down and down in always widening rings of being. In these remaining minutes of the meditation, I want to share some reflections on the time we're in right now. Speaking to that idea of unmourned grief. And I invite you, as I'm sharing this, to kind of pay attention to your body and your heart and your mind, and just seeing how you're holding, what's arising for you in the body and heart and mind. Making this a conscious practice. I want to just begin by sharing that Rebecca and I were watching the news last night. And afterwards, I remarked that I felt I'd been in a boxing match with Muhammad Ali. It felt like one thing after another. It felt unrelenting, one incredibly painful news story after another. I kind of finished up feeling, in a way, kind of shell-shocked. It was just so much. And there's the element that kind of can be put over for now to one side of just the way television tends to deal with news, and that old saying that in newspapers that what bleeds leads, what bleeds leads. That the more drama and the more blood and all of that, the more likely it's to be covered. But even putting that to one side, there's the reality that we're living in right now. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I've talked a number of times during the pandemic and even before that about unmourned grief, particularly in the context, kind of somewhat adapting that term to the context of seeing or hearing painful, difficult news and other information, and not having the time, the space, the resources to really process what we're taking in, not having the space and time to grieve, to allow ourselves to feel our pain before the next thing comes along, the next tragedy or the next outrage happens. And then the same happens again, and we move on to the next thing. And I believe what we're left with is unmourned, unprocessed grief and other emotions that continue to affect us, but that we're unconscious of. I think I've mentioned this, something from Jung in recent weeks. I think this has come up, but what he said was, what is not brought into consciousness comes to us as fate. What is not brought into consciousness comes to us as fate. So if we think of this as, this unprocessed pain, at times grief, that just kind of lodges in us, and times gets stuck in us. Sometimes we consciously push it down because we have to get on with our daily lives. And so it affects our lives, it affects our life without us really being aware of it. So that's really what Jung is speaking to. If it isn't brought into consciousness, it comes to us as fate. It comes out in unconscious ways. We know the ways it can happen. Anger jumps up, and where did that come from? And it's often our fear comes up. And we know it in terms of, obviously, in terms of trauma, but I'm not limiting this to trauma. So what I want to name again and say again is how important it is that we find ways of opening to these emotions, to these mind states, to the bodily sensations, and allowing ourselves to feel them and process them, and to be able to do this individually, each of us finding our ways doing this through all of the practices that we explore and investigate here and in other Dharma settings, but all other religious and spiritual practices that can support us as well. The way yoga and Qigong and Tai Chi can help us move things through the body, and energy practices, and a whole range of skillful practices and other traditions can help us hold our grief and have skillful practices for doing that. So holding and processing what is unprocessed, doing this individually, but also doing it collectively, finding ways of doing it together. And I remember, I just mentioned that almost 2 years ago, we had a kind of, I'd spoken a lot about my mother's death in mid-2018. And as her anniversary approached, I wanted to kind of remember her and bring her into the room. But I didn't want it just to be about my mother. But so what we did, and I think it was Cassie helped bring this to my mind, was in the Jewish tradition, the practice of yahrzeit, the remembering people, loved ones who've got passed, on the anniversary. And so what we did was we invited everyone, anyone and everyone to bring in the community, to bring some memory, a photo, a candle, a memento. And this was when we were in person, to remember their loved ones. And I remember how powerful I felt that was, of being together in that way and being collectively remembering our loved ones and holding that space for all of us. And I think one of the things we're very much aware of is that we haven't had real ways of grieving collectively, or very few. I mean, there was one close to the inauguration that was, I think, was strong and powerful, but very few of these. And so I want to name that, rename that, and maybe invite us to think about that in the weeks and months ahead. And I also want to, in these final moments of this meditation, want to name just a few of the painful truths that we have been living with in this last year, but also beyond, the years beyond that as well. And with the invitation to sit with whatever comes up and give space to what's arising in your own heart and your own mind and your own body. And beginning with the pandemic itself, we've just in the last couple of days reached 3 million people worldwide who have died from COVID. And, you know, there's a thing about big numbers, that they get so big that it's hard even to fathom. What does that mean? What does 3 million mean? You know, what does 6 million mean? And, you know, obviously none of us have the ability to take in 3 million, but we can take in, you know, maybe in a smaller way, in a more individual way, the weight of these losses. If we think of it in terms of the pain and the grief of family members and friends who've lost loved ones. You know, maybe, I'm sure among all our community here, there's some that have lost loved ones. We can take that in, we can open to whatever is arising within us, and hold those who are in pain, who are suffering. They're suffering those very personal losses of loved ones. And all the other losses too, those who've lost their work, their jobs, people who've lost their businesses that maybe they've put years and years into building, and all the different ways people have suffered. You know, how lives have been changed, often in very painful ways and very challenging ways. Here in the US, obviously, almost all of us, perhaps all of us today are here, nearly all of us in the US, but also around the world, you know, just to see what's going on now in Brazil, the UK, which you know, on a per capita level is very similar to here, Italy, the way that India, which is is really struggling now, you know, a country with over 1 billion people. So everyone in the rich world and in the poor world. Not to take this on as a burden, but as an opportunity just to let our hearts open as much as feels possible right now. And not as any sense of obligation, because the heart opening depends hugely on the timing, you know, when one is ready to do it. So, you know, just as much as feels right for you. Just turning to another form of pain that is very much front and center in all our lives, but all our lives in different ways, is the pain caused by police and others in authority killing African Americans and other people of color at rates entirely disproportionate to the population, the rate of the population. And sharing this in loving kindness and in compassion, not from a place of blame or judgment right now, just to try to be clear about that. But really to honor and name just a few of the individuals, and honor them and their lives, and recognize that they should have been able to live their lives a full life, not cut short. And we all know very well the death, the killing, the murder of George Floyd. 9 minutes and 29 seconds, having his breath forced out of him. We know the trial going on right now. And Daunte Wright, killed at in a traffic stop in Minneapolis, not far from where the trial is happening right now. This happened in Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis. Breonna Taylor in her apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. Freddie Gray in the police van in Baltimore. Eric Garner, who was selling cigarettes, a few cigarettes in Staten Island, New York, where we maybe not first, but became familiar with I Can't Breathe. Trayvon Martin, going back now some 7 years in Florida. Just a few of the many, and just wanting to hold them and hold all who've died in these ways, and all their loved ones in our hearts. And just the extraordinary pain, not just to them, but to really all members of the African American community and among people of color. Where the experience is felt much more personally and deeply. Charles Blow, in a powerful op-ed piece in the New York Times yesterday, said, society has become desensitized to police killings of Black men. Society has become desensitized to police killings of Black men. And one just in whatever way feels right to you right now, just holding that. Maybe just for a minute in silence. Holding whatever is coming up for you in your heart, your body, your mind. And because this is a lot and the meditation has already gone on for quite a while, I'm not even gonna name more than, just to bring in the mass shootings and recognize that the New York Times gave a partial list of mass shootings in 2021. And again, as Charles Blow said, with the same thing could be said, society has become desensitized to mass shootings, just for the same reasons as this unmourned grief of we just move on to the next thing, the next killing. And we pay a price. So I want to share that today only this is just a piece of all that we've been living through and are living through, and that we've experienced in different ways, some in the same ways. And all of us pay a price for not being able to process, to hold fully all that we're experiencing. And if we are not to keep acting out the pain unconsciously, it's important for us to find the ways of processing the pain, our individual pain, our collective pain. This is what our practice is for, to help us transform suffering into freedom. So just taking a quiet minute to finish. To finish with this poem by Gregory Orr. It's titled Untitled. Untitled. This is what was bequeathed us, this earth the beloved left, and leaving left to us. No other world but this one. Willows and the river, and the factory with its black smokestacks. No other shore, only this bank on which the living gather. No meaning but what we find here. No purpose but what we make. That and the beloved's clear instructions turn me into song, sing me awake. No meaning but what we find here. No purpose but what we make. That and the beloved's clear instructions turn me into song, sing me awake. Thank you. Thank you for your willingness and openness to, and perseverance to open to that sharing, and however it lands for you, to let that be your path and practice. And Emily got in touch with me the other day and said she's going to be out today meeting with a friend for the first time in a year or so. So she won't be leading us in the movement today. And just for time reasons, I won't try to channel Emily this morning. But what I will invite us to do is just to take a couple of minutes to stand up, and, you know, if there's anything that wants to be let go of or shaken out, you know, you do that, or do it sitting down if that's easier for you. I have this, just as a very much aside funny anecdote. I have one of these Apple Watches. I know if anyone has one, and I do this thing where if I make a very jerky movement, then it tells me that it thinks I've fallen and then wants to, if I want to call an ambulance or something. I think it's available for people of all ages. But I just found it a very funny thing. If I kind of do a sudden movement, then it tells me, do I want to call an ambulance or do I want emergency response? I know if anyone has that, it may be familiar with that on the what do they call this watch? Apple Watch, iWatch, Apple Watch. Anyway, so what I'd like to do for a few minutes here is see if there are any questions. Just looking through the looking through, saving the chat, and would invite you, if you would like to, if anyone would like to ask a question, share on your heart, and you can do that either physically or look through the or do it on the there's a way of doing that.
Hugh, people in the reactions section can also raise their hand.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That was Margaret, right?
Yes.
Reactions. You can raise your hand as well as giving other kind gestures. I think there are only kind gestures.
I'm seeing one question, Hugh, from Priscilla, and she says, what does trust in the world mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. The way I would respond to that is to say, there's something Einstein said, was asked, I think something like, what's the most important question to ask? Something like this. And he said, is the universe a kind place? Maybe I'm kind of paraphrasing him. And trust in life, trust in the universe is really, I think, is very much the same as what we talk about when we talk about taking refuge in the Dharma. We can't talk about taking refuge in the Dharma as a kind of very specific sense of taking refuge in the Buddha's teachings of, suffering and the end of suffering, mindfulness and all of that. But it has, and that's a wise and helpful way to understand taking refuge in the Dharma. But it can be understood and experienced in a wider way of taking refuge in life itself, in that life will, if we open our hearts, that life will be life. Life will take care of us. When I say take care of us, it doesn't mean it will give us the outcome that we are looking for, but life will always just be life. And we really only have two choices with life. One, acknowledge that life will be life, that things will come and everything will change and everything will come to an end, that all of us will die, that all of the cities that we've built will go back to being forests, and this earth that, the human part of the earth that we've created, all of this will, dust unto dust, etc. And just to acknowledge the truth of that, and to really, not just to know it in our heads, in the carrot, but to know it deep down. And that's the practice, is to make that knowing of that we can trust in life. Let that go deep down into our hearts, deep down into our spirit, because the alternative to that is what I've talked about quite a number of times, many times, in fact, and that is that we're in a struggle with life. We're in a struggle with life, with the way life is unfolding. And one thing that happens when we do this that's inevitable, and that is that we'll suffer. Because when we're in a struggle with life, we won't win out. We may do fine for a while, and we may be a billionaire, but in the end, life will be life, and our death will be our death, and our aging will be our aging, and our sickness will be our sickness when it comes. So when we struggle with life in the way that I'm talking about here, suffering follows on as the night follows the day. It just is an inevitable thing, because we cannot win in those terms. There's no way we win in that struggle. And the only way even winning might even have a meaning would be to end the struggle. That's the only meaningful winning that we can talk about, is just ending the struggle. That doesn't mean we don't try to do whatever we can to change what needs to be changed. Absolutely. The last thing I'm talking about here is passivity or just whatever. The exact opposite. If we're gonna open fully to our life, that's the fundamental basis, really, for bringing about any meaningful change, is to say yes to what is. And to say yes to what is to trust in ourselves and to trust in our life. And to trust in ourselves and in our life, for almost all of us, requires a training of the heart and the mind, or a retraining of the heart and the mind. Maybe it's some part of both training and retraining. I hope that's helpful, Priscilla, and would invite anyone else who has anything to share in the chat, to share, in the group as a whole. And I'm happy. I mean, if you feel that you really don't, you feel right now you don't have questions, not a problem. Just to let them come up in you when they're ready to come up, and bring them here or elsewhere when you're ready to share them in this kind of a forum.
Hugh, I put a question in the chat about practices for retraining the mind to trust others and ourselves. Yeah. When we've been conditioned for decades not to trust.
Yeah.
We've been conditioned to fear the unknown and not to trust ourselves. So meditation on certain topics, or what other practices for retraining?
In a way, what I'd say, Mark, is it's everything. It's all of the Dharma is the answer to that question. It's all of these practices, our practices for training the mind and the heart. And this is really what the Buddha said, that it can be done. We can train our minds. However conditioned we may have been by our own stories, I use that word papancha, proliferation, our tendency to proliferate, and by our cultures and our world's stories and conditioning. And I don't want to understate for one moment the power of that conditioning, and therefore the importance of, even to reinforce the importance of the practices, the practice and the practices, because, we're working, in some way, we're working against the stream. The stream of life is kind of these big waves coming at us, we really need to train to develop, you know, into strong enough swimmers, if swimming is the metaphor, or get strong enough surfboards, or build strong enough boats. You know, all of these are images, except for the surfboard that the Buddha used. I don't think there were surfboards around, or that, you know, use of things in that way. But he did talk about getting to the other side. One of his most powerful teachings was about the raft. Many of you are probably familiar with the story of the raft. You know, somebody, you know, said, you know, if I wanted to cross the river, I can't remember how the story begins right now. It's one of the central stories. But if you want to cross the river, you take a raft to take you across the river. And the Buddha asked, now, when you've used the raft to take you across the river, do you carry the raft around on your back everywhere you go? And basically he said, the answer, no, you don't. Or the person who was asking the question said, no. He said, exactly, you don't. The raft is for getting you across the stream. Once you're across the stream, you don't need the raft anymore. Maybe for another stream if you haven't, you know, but if you finally cross the stream that it's important to cross, the teachings, all of these teachings are about getting across the stream. You know, they're about getting across this river of dukkha, this river of suffering, and to, you know, to get across so that we don't need to keep crossing over and over, or we don't get drowned on the way, that these teachings are simply to get us from suffering to freedom, that being the river, from suffering that we're caught up in, all that we've just been talking about, conditioning and all of that, to get us across to the other side. And then we don't need the teachings anymore. Another teaching of the Buddha called the Kalama Sutta. The Buddha, you know, was asked, how do we know what's a good teaching? What's a true teaching? Have all these teachers come and tell us, oh, my teaching is the best. Don't believe that Buddha over there. Don't believe this one. You know, believe me, and, you know, all of that. And the Buddha said, it's right that you question. It's good that you question, because there are conditions there that lead to questioning. And he said, he gave 10 reasons not to believe, you know, in a teaching. Don't believe it just because it's passed down. Don't believe it just because it's written down. Don't believe it just because, you know, it fits with your feelings. Don't believe it just because a certain teacher said it, you know, and he goes through all of these and he says, believe based on your own experience. Does this lead to happiness? Does it lead to well-being? If it leads to happiness, to well-being and freedom, follow that path. Yes, it's a trustworthy path. If it leads you to suffering, you know, if the teacher, you know, is not walking the talk, for example, you know, they're teaching these lovely teachings and then they're going out and abusing people, or, you know, abusing students or whatever it might be, then you say, no, there's something wrong with this. So don't believe just even a, you know, somebody you might really respect. Base it on your own, really touching into, you know, is this authentic? And I spoke about this, I think, maybe I did it in the Inside Timer group, but just the sense of trustworthiness, the trustworthiness of a path. Is this worthy of your trust, of my trust? This path, this teaching, test it, see for yourself. I use the Pali word. I don't use too many of them, but the word ehipassiko, and I'll write that down in the chat. But ehipassiko means see for yourself. Test it in your own practice, in your own experience. Ehipassiko.
So Hugh,
Yes.
We have a question from Claude about mourning and awareness. And after that, Sarah has a question for you about what about people who have not accepted the way life is?
Thank you, Margaret. Just before, I'm just writing that down. Claude, would you like to share your question?
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Hugh. I've been back a lot of time in the acknowledgement that I have been unable to mourn the grief, very old grief. And I'm still mourning or not mourning this grief. So my question was, what beside recognizing or being mindful of the grief you have not mourned, what mourning grief would mean? Because even
Yes.
processing is very, I can have a sense of it, but how does it happen?
Yeah. It's a really, really important question. And I just want to note that I responded to Mark's question with the answer, all of the practices, but in speaking, and that really is, I think, a true answer. But because I couldn't in 5 minutes or 3 minutes give an answer that would be comprehensive enough to be really even meaningful. So just really to get that point across. But your question then kind of, moves the question to a more specific level with the theme that we've been looking at today, exploring today, unmourned grief, that I shared about that notion. That calls for not a general answer, but a much more specific one. And what I would say is the practice, it's essentially the practice of mindfulness and compassion. Mindfulness accompanied by the heart practices, the range of heart practices of compassion and loving kindness. And, if forgiveness is appropriate, then forgiveness. And it's really the practice of really what we were doing today in meditation, to open. And in this case, I think there may be more of an inquiry involved, that kind of invites unmourned grief to surface. So we're not just waiting for whatever might come up, but we might consciously bring attention to that and say, okay, let me consciously look at this grief that still, I feel I'm still holding in my body, in my heart, in my emotions, and in my mind, maybe in different ways, and maybe more heavy in different areas than other, or different parts of our consciousness than others. But to really bring that inquiry to that particular experience. So we're kind of putting the spotlight on that unmourned grief. And then, as we do in our practice, to really invite an opening. It might be with a question, what is calling for, to be open to? What is calling to be let go of? What is really calling for my compassionate response right now, for my care? And to, in a really kind, compassionate, gentle way, really explore that, and explore it, I would say, really, stay as grounded as you can in your body, and just let the body in some way kind of guide you towards where perhaps you need to go, because we'll often feel it held in some particular area of our body where, it's almost like it's been locked there, it's been, held there. And in the ways that we've been practicing and we kind of invite and encourage every week, is just to allow what's here to be here, to come and go, to be held in kindness, not just treating it as one of many things. Oh, there's a sound and there's a feeling and there's a breath and all of that. But more specifically in this case, keep the attention as focused as you can, insofar as it's helpful. If it becomes unhelpful, always give yourself permission to do what you need to do, to move away if you need to come back at a later time, to take a walk if things become more intense, too intense. And they can sometimes, with working with grief, just make sure that you have a space to move in and out, and not to feel obliged to deal with stuff right now if it's too hard to deal with. So I want to hold that piece alongside the opening, and really just the allowing and making space for whatever needs to come up. And it may be you're doing this a number of times and you're coming back to it. And when you do that, you'll be coming back. You'll be a different person when you're coming back, because your experience will be a different person on that day from the other day you did it, from the other period you did it. So we're showing up in a different way, and new things will likely come to light. I mean, obviously, if we've locked it in a tight case and a space, and we don't know where the key is, it's really locked away. It may take a lot of really kind, compassionate inquiry and openness to work to get into that. And then we might need to, it may be that we might need some support in doing that. It might be working with a grief counselor, working with a mindfulness teacher, doing a course on grief, doing a practical course on working with grief. These are all possibilities. So I'm not saying, those are very much on the, in the ballpark, or in the, in the field. We don't always have to do it on our own. I think I want to really emphasize that the support of others in this process. It may just be a loved one. It may be a good friend that we're close to. This is something worth speaking. Just a name in itself is having resources that are available to us and open to us. Work, particularly not just with grief, but particularly with grief, with difficult, painful emotions. And I don't want to put you in any way on the spot, Regina, but I would invite you, if you would like to now, and I don't even know if you're here right now, you were earlier, if you'd like to share anything on this, I'd invite you to, just from your own practice and your own experience, to bring that in. So in the meantime,
I am here. Yeah.
So, Regina, you are?
Yes. Yeah, I'm here. Yes.
Would you like to share a few words, just for, and no obligation whatsoever, but just if you feel you'd like to? Yeah, I would love if you were open to it and wanted to, and equally if you choose not to.
No, I thank you. I would just say that I agree with everything you said, and I think that it was really helpful. I would add that in one of the things that I've found in the process of grief is that, and it kind of goes back to wise effort, that there are times when our mind and our behaviors can take us into greater suffering. And I think it's really helpful to notice when our thinking processes are like where we're ruminating and we're doing a lot of self-criticizing, or the regret is getting too heavy in some way. It just, I guess it's the sense that our thinking has become unskillful. And it really doesn't add anything to the process of transforming and moving through and bearing grief. And so I think that that is something that I have discovered, that even though we want to recognize and allow what comes up in our experience, we also still want to have the wisdom, the discernment of, is this useful? Is this really supporting me? So I would add that.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's really the kind of the umbrella that holds everything, is that wise discernment, is that kind of seeing, is this helpful for me right now, or am I going, am I being taken over by things so that it isn't serving, and it's, in fact, as you were saying, kind of making things worse and getting us more tangled in a tangle, as we say. So thank you so much for sharing that, Regina.
Thank you.
Margaret, who was someone else was wanting to share, I think, and maybe make this the last one for today, and we can continue this process, and in the coming weeks we'll see what what's most helpful.
I am looking for it. The second question was, what about those who have not accepted the way life is? And it was followed also by a comment on how do you manage grief for people who are in truly untenable situations, sex trafficked victims, victims of abuse in other ways. I think maybe those questions are related.
Thank you, Margaret.
Reconciling grief for lives that seem to be consumed entirely by suffering was the second comment.
Yeah, in a way, those are such big and important questions. I think they really call for a lot of attention and some time as well. And I want to be conscious of time and in answering them, and acknowledge that this is what I'm going to share is not going to be a full enough answer, but that we can come back and keep not be a full answer, let's say, and keep coming back and exploring. I think the place where I would start is, and I'm taking the first, I'm interpreting the first question as, let's say, hypothetically, like we're in a situation, or we're living with a person where our best judgment is that person is not willing or able to accept life as it is. And so what do we do in that situation? And kind of then the extended question of those, involved in grief, for those who are, involved in sex trafficking and abuse of various kinds. And the place I would start really is in there may be things in life, and there are things in life that that we don't have an answer to, and that we can't do more to change and to deal with the harm and the suffering. Actually, bring any in the world change. And I hope that's clear enough that I'll give an example. bring it so it's not kind of up in the air or abstract. I have a son, and I haven't asked his permission, but I know just I sense that this would be okay to share. That he's had some difficulties in his life over recent years, and I might actually not so much speaking of him, except to say that, to honor his, his life and his confidentiality. But there was a place and times where I kind of had, I recognized that his life was beyond my control, that ultimately, as I said in the equanimity meditation, kind of recognition that your life, comes from your choices, and that's ultimately is not in my control. Even those whom we're the closest to, who we care perhaps most about and more about, that I came to, or had to at times just recognize that it wasn't in my power, that I could do everything that I could do to love him, to care for him, to do whatever I could to support him in his journey and in his life. And there was a point at which, at different times, it came up that there was just a letting go. And what I could come back to was just my caring and my wish for him and my love for him. And, as it happened, and everything is ongoing, but, he seems to have found his way to the other side of things. And, his life is unfolding in a pretty fruitful way. And and I just wanted to get across that point that that sometimes it comes down to letting go of what we can't control and changing what we can, and coming back to that place of acceptance. That was just my personal experience of it. And I think in a more general answer to the question, coming back to love, coming back to loving kindness, to compassion, and coming back to the practice is what we always can take refuge in, and it comes back to the refuges of taking refuge in our own capacity to wake up, taking refuge in the truth, the Dharma, taking refuge in the community. That is always available to us. Those refuges are always, I believe, are always true refuges for us. So even if we have to let go, and let life unfold as it will unfold, that we can come back to that. And again, I don't think, and that I would just include, in the sex trafficking, in the abuse, what are the ways we can engage in wise and compassionate action? Maybe it's giving money, maybe it's doing some advocacy work. There are ways probably that we can do some things. Maybe they're limited in terms of that big, the large suffering there. But we can always come back to loving kindness. We can always come back to compassion. We can always come back to forgiveness. And knowing that this is a training of the heart and the mind, that we may not be available to us right now, but we can come back to that we can come back to that. And I just want to, I think I want to just leave it there for now, and invite one, a continuation of any questions that you would like that we could continue with this next week. Feel free, if you like, to send me any, personally. If you don't want to put them in the chat box, I'll put my email here. There we go. I put my email there if you want to, send it, or you could do that personally in the chat as well if you know how to do that. And Cloud says the Serenity Prayer. Yes, exactly. So again, just in these last couple of minutes, I'd invite us to just touch in with what's present right now. Holding whatever is here for you with kindness. And if it's difficult, remembering just the simple hand on your heart, maybe a message of compassion or loving kindness. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I accept this moment just as it is. And just in the last minute or so, we're sharing at the beginning about this beautiful time of year in where we're living. Many of us are living in the East Coast, and particularly here in the Washington area. Share this from Mary Oliver. When I am among the trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I'm so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while. The light flows from their branches. And they call again, it's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine. And they call again, it's simple, they say. And you too have come into this world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine. Thank you all for your practice and your presence today.